Hey everyone, it's Jacob. In 2014, I wrote a book called The Future of Work. And in that book, I created a concept and an image called the evolution of the employee, which looks at how employees are evolving and changing and what organizations need to do to adapt. I actually shared that image on LinkedIn fairly recently and it went completely viral. It got over 1 million views on LinkedIn and thousands of interactions and engagements and comments around the world. In fact, it became so popular that I decided to expand on that concept a little bit, and I put together a brand new PDF which goes into more detail looking at what that evolution of the employee looks like and also provides action items for what you and your organization can do to evolve and adapt as a result. So if you want to get access to that PDF, go to thefutureemployee.com. Again, that is thefutureemployee.com.
And I think that every time a leader says to themselves or someone says, "Why are you so sensitive?" we also need to ask the other question is, why am I so insensitive? Because maybe the problem is not that the other person is sensitive, it's that we're being insensitive. And I would dare to say, as a person who said those words many, many times in my career, that the people who say, "Why are you so sensitive?" the problem is not that the other person is so sensitive. It's that the person who says that is too insensitive.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of The Future of Work. I'm your host, Jacob Morgan, and today I am joined by Krister Ungerböck. He's the author of the Wall Street Journal #1 best-selling book called 22 Talk Shifts, Tools to Transform Leadership in Business, in Partnership, and in Life. Krister, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation, Jacob.
I gotta say, it's quite a lofty title there. Transform Leadership, Partnership, and Life. So I'm excited to jump into all these things with you. Why don't we start with just a little bit of background about you? What have you done in the past, earlier on in your career, that led you towards writing this book? And why did you write it?
Yeah. Well, so before starting my kind of life as an author, I was a CEO of a software company, which coincidentally we just sold. I'm still an owner in that company. We just sold it for over $200 million this year to a private equity firm. And, we were a global software company, and, we had employees in 8 countries, customers in 50 countries. And so I built businesses in 6 different countries. I actually learned to lead in 2 foreign languages as an adult, which is some of the informs a little bit of the story of the book. And as let's say I learned a program. So I've always been very kind of methodical, logical. When I want leadership books, I want things that are like practical things phrases that I can start using literally as soon as I close chapter 1. And so the impetus for the book was 5-6 years ago. I found myself at the YMCA signing up for a gym membership, and I broke down crying when the woman asked me, "Who is your emergency contact?" And I had no one. And I had built this, company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had leading hundreds of employees around the country. And in that moment, I had no followers. I had a breakdown with my business partners that caused me to decide to, leave the company as CEO. And then 2 weeks later, my wife walked out on me. And so I was like, my family's not following me. And this was really impetus about tools to transform leadership in the context of business, but also in partnership. A lot of the research that I did was really, at the highest levels of an organization, this concept of partnership and some of the dynamics of fear that enter into leaving like a marriage or a lifetime career as a senior executive where you're making a significant income. That fear dynamic actually starts to create some very similarities between long-term relationships and business partnerships. And that was really the impetus was to try to bring that through together in the context of practical fill-in-the-blanks communication tools that can help us be better leaders in this kind of new age that we're in.
So why do you think that happened to you? Because I feel like this is something a lot of leaders probably struggle with. So you're building this successful company, but meanwhile, a lot of personal things in your life were falling apart. Was it because you were just so consumed with work that you just didn't see that other stuff, or you didn't make time for it? Like, what was it that kept you from taking care of the personal side?
So I think ultimately I was a very kind of demanding, like, we're going to grow. I mean, my vision when I was 19 years old, I wrote my life mission was to build $1 billion company in my life. And that was
at 19 years old. You wrote that down at 19?
Yeah. And admittedly, if I hadn't left, and interestingly, the company, certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, probably will be $1 billion company.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing is, like, that vision, what I realized that while I was writing the book is that if you're a CEO or you're a top level executive, you have really two tools at your disposal to inspire people to follow you. You have the vision of great things that you want to do together. And I think ultimately that's why people followed me. But the other tool is, are you the kind of person that someone wants to follow? And that comes to how we treat people, how we speak to them. And ultimately what I realized is that I had a vision that people wanted to follow, but I wasn't necessarily being the leader that people wanted to follow. And so here's the thing that's really important is, in any organization, there's a handful of people, 1 to 5 people that actually get to define the vision.
Yeah.
Every other leader in that organization can only really, for the most part, inspire people by being someone that people want to follow. And I think fundamentally, the leadership, the aggressive leadership style that I used to build this, highly successful company is the exact same leadership style people are running away from these days, that's fueling a lot of this great resignation and inability of, let's say, companies with mediocre cultures to actually attract and keep people, good people.
It's crazy how leadership can change so quickly over the years. So it sounds like, at least on the business side at work, you were very good at setting that kind of a vision. You were very demanding, but then maybe in your personal life with friends, with family, that approach, that style doesn't work as well.
So admittedly, I thought I was very different in my personal life than my professional life, but it wasn't until I started to get to and I was much more relaxed with my family and whatever. I didn't kind of demand and tell people what to do, because you don't have to be that smart to figure out that doesn't work with a wife and, teenagers or something, So, yeah. But what I realized when I started looking at my words and some of the kind of subtext behind my words is I was still using aggressive language, but it was maybe more passive aggressive. It was still the underlying things were the same. Yeah. And that was why I think this book was so powerful and so timely. Now that ultimately with COVID and quarantine, like, the walls between our personal and professional worlds kind of they're gone.
Yeah.
You don't need to have your kids crawling around or walking around in the background for the last year and a half to know that those walls are no longer there. And I think that what we need, and what I wish I had 5 or 10 or 20 years ago, was language that works equally well for leading in the context of a business relationship, as well as a parent or in a more committed romantic relationship or a marriage. And that was what I wrote the book to do.
Got it. Yeah, I think my big weakness is around being too critical. And, sometimes you can do that in the business world because you have people who work with or for you. I mean, even then it's not like great. But my big weakness, I think, personally, is to be too critical in my personal life. So I'm trying to work on that too, because I totally get that you can't, those two things aren't as applicable in the business world as they are in the personal world. You did mention something though I thought that was pretty interesting, and that is that to separate the vision that you create from the person you are. And I don't think a lot of leaders do a very good job of that. I think a lot of leaders believe that if they create an inspiring vision, that people are automatically going to want to follow that vision, and the leader just automatically attaches themselves to that vision. It's like, you're going to follow the vision, therefore you're going to follow me. Can you talk a little bit about why those two things are not the same, and how can people want to follow the vision but not the person?
Well, I think that this is one of the fundamental changes that's happened in the United States, at least over the last 18, 24 months, is the following the vision is often, it's a financial motivation, it's a career motivation, it's a success motivation. But following the person is about emotional connection and feeling like the company, or really not the company, feeling like the person who is the leader who is most directly responsible for my emotional well-being as an employee cares. Yeah. And ultimately, one of the things I realized I did a lot of kind of new age work as I was trying to figure out the tools that I was missing all these years reading business books. And I never really
new age work. What do you mean new age work? Because people are
hanging out with a lot of people in California, like long-haired ponytail people. Like I'm the only person with a sport coat, and they're like, "What's that guy doing here?" And I'm like, I'm there trying to figure out like what have I been missing all these years? But always filtering. I didn't go like drink the Kool-Aid or anything. I was always filtering like how can this be used not just in the context of family or romantic relationships, but how could it be taken back to the business world? And so I used to call them like these new age kind of woo-woo people. Now I just call them people from California.
Yeah. So hey, I'm in California. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I actually love California. So it's in any case, I kind of lost my train of thought. So I was going into these rooms really trying to kind of, and a lot of times they would say, oh, and you've probably heard this before is, if you change what's on the inside, then your words and how you behave will just automatically change. Well, so just like take a thought experiment. I change what's on my inside, and I'm like totally a different person, but I don't change the words that I speak to you. I still use critical language. I still, So what if we went the other way around? What if I change the words, but I actually don't change what's on the inside? Do you care? You still, you feel, right?
Yeah.
And again, the reality, what I found is that we can actually, and this is why I wrote the book, is these simple fill in the blanks phrases, is when we change the words that we speak to others, it's actually a framework for changing ourselves from the outside in. It's kind of like just, we're walking through, and there are a number of examples that I talk about in the book, and we can go into those if you want, but it's actually a much more powerful framework to change from the outside in by simply changing our words, because it starts to give us new information about how people respond to our words that then fundamentally creates kind of a cycle of actually changing how we think and how we feel inside.
No, I think that does make a lot of sense. And I know this might sound like a weird question, but why is language so important? And I ask that because I know there's a lot of like tough love people out there. I come from a Russian family, and they're very like, I wouldn't say, at least culturally, that side of the world is as loving and as open, right? It's very like tough love. If you have a problem, suck it up. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you. There's not a lot of that, at least in like the Russian culture. And there's some leaders out there who just might say, well, I show who I am by my actions, and maybe I might say things the wrong way, or maybe I might come off the wrong way, but I show people that I value them just by my actions, right? Recognizing them, giving them gift cards or whatever it is. So why is language actually so important, and does it matter? Like, is language more important than action?
I believe yes. And there's two reasons why. I have a story. I was doing a CIO event last year and I interviewed a bunch of CIOs of pretty large companies. And I asked them, what was a time where you really were impacted by a leader, like, their compassionate leadership? And one of the people told me a story of a person who, he said, this boss was terrible. It happened to be a woman, so demanding, and she said, but I stuck with it because I enjoyed the job. And I think it was in healthcare, so there was a lot of purpose that he got out of the role. And about 2 years after he started working for this CEO, she did something at like maybe a fundraiser or something, had like a really touching moment. And he was like, wow, I saw that person in a completely different light after that. Well, what about the 2 years before that? Those were her words, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's just it's a little bit higher risk way of leading. Like, well, I'm just going to wait for them to see that one touching moment that they may or may not see, or I can use more compassionate language, like on an ongoing basis. And in today's difficulty retaining and hiring employees, like the risk tolerance or the how do you say, the margin of error of leadership, that basically if I'm the leader that tells my best performer, I use the phrase that says, all right, that causes them to leave and switch off at the end of the day and say, today's the day I'm going to actually update my LinkedIn profile and I'm going to start accepting emails. All it takes, and this is another thing I'll mention, that one of the things that was really powerful, and this is one similar bridge between relationships personally and professionally, is we need to stop asking employees why they left our organization. We need to start asking them, what happened the day that you decided to look? Because great leaders don't stop people from leaving the organization. They stop people from looking. And ultimately, the same thing happens in relationships. After I got divorced, I would ask women, I would frequently ask, once I got to know them, like second date question. It would be like, so tell me about the day you decided to leave your last marriage. Every single person knew exactly a story. And usually that story was 2-3 years before they actually left the marriage. Yeah. The same thing happens with employees in organizations. It's maybe just they may not stick around for 2 or 3 years because the risk of leaving a company is a lot lower of leaving a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, even for my wife and I, we recently relocated from the Bay Area to Southern California because COVID. We were there. All of our friends moved away, and there was a specific moment when my wife was basically like, "That's it." We never thought we were going to relocate to Southern California ever, because this is where we're from originally. And there was a very clear moment where, we just remember that, like, we decided this is it. Like, we got to get out of here. And I think you're right. There's a lot of those types of moments for people where they decide either this place isn't for me, or I could see myself here long term, or I'm going to start looking. And it sounds like language is a big part of helping make that decision of what that moment is.
Yeah, and usually it was I don't know what it was. Moving to a different city is one thing, but moving to a new job, it's usually in our research, and a lot of the other research supports this. It's usually because their boss says something to them, and they're like, "That's the last straw." Yeah. And you know what? The boss almost never ever hears what that is. So it may be a year later. I had one employee who, he's like, "Oh, I'm leaving. I got an amazing opportunity to be a director of marketing at a software company in San Diego." And, I was like, "Oh, well, we can't compete with that. We're in St. Louis. He wants to move to San Diego." And then when I asked him, like, "So tell me about the day that you decided to leave," that's when he said, "Oh, yeah. He told me a story of like a rough time that he had with his boss." And so that was the thing that he said, I'm gonna start looking. Yeah.
That's interesting. And you're right. I think a lot of leaders don't even know, they never hear this from their people. Which is insane to me now that you mention it, that we don't know as leaders why people are actually leaving. Like, what was that moment?
It's because we don't ask the questions to find out. And those are some of the examples in the book that, it's about how we ask questions, how we create safety for people to give us real, honest answers, and how we listen and kind of deepen the conversation when we sense that they're just kind of tiptoeing around something that's probably deeper. And so that was one of the biggest tools that, people often comment on the Amazon reviews about the book.
Do you have some common examples of where language tends to get in the way? And then we'll look at the flip side, like, where does language tend to get in the way, or where do we use it incorrectly? And then we can go over a couple examples, and then we'll look at how to actually fix that and what the right way is to use language.
Well, I think there's two things as leaders that, in any relationship, personal or professional, is we need to look at stopping the things that cause people to want to leave their jobs or relationship with bosses, and doing more of the things that cause people to want to stay, right? And so you mentioned criticism, for example. Criticism there's actually 2 or 3 chapters in the book about some words to avoid when doing criticism. There's actually some very simple language techniques, like just not using the word "you" when you're having a conversation about someone's performance. Now, that sounds like, how would you even have a conversation about someone's performance without saying, "Jacob, you did this"? Well, if you simply take that and you start saying, "Well, how would I say it if I didn't say the word "you"?" you now start unlocking different ways that are kind of a little bit more indirect, but they're less likely to put someone into that state of like, I'm shut down and all I heard was the negative thing you said, and I never heard the positive thing because of the way the negative thing was said. So these are the kind of really simple rules that we have in the book. So criticism, but interestingly, criticism, a lot of the research in the book, criticism is one of the 4 predictors of divorce.
Oh my God. Don't tell me that. Freaking me out.
So there are others, but interestingly, when I went through the journey, it was actually shortly after the book was published, I had suspected this all along, and I was always looking for, I was always talking to a lot of like marriage counselors and thinking like, what are the things that are similar between marriages and relationships between bosses and employees? A lot of it is fear and silence because of a power dynamic. But the interesting thing, I asked these 2 marriage counselors that had been counselors, like they were husband and wife marriage counseling team. And I think they had like 75 or 80 years of marriage counseling. They're retired. And I said, what have women and men been saying on your therapy couch for decades? And they said, he doesn't listen. He always solves my problems, always criticizing me, and values the work more than, he loves work more than he loves me. Things like that. And men have basically very similar wording. And so the interesting thing is this is the same things essentially that people say about their bosses when they're frustrated with their bosses. He always solves my problems, never lets me, have my own ideas, cares more about the work than he cares about me personally, criticizes me. So there's actually a lot to be said that the behaviors that create unhappy employees also create unhappy spouses and unhappy children.
Yeah. Well, I love, so one of the, I guess, immediate tips there was when you're kind of doing performance reviews or any kind of discussion to avoid saying you. Do you have any others like that you can share with us? Because I think those types of like very simple, practical tips for people would be very, very helpful. And maybe you can also explain, what do you do instead of saying you?
That's probably a little bit more involved because there's really more nuanced. One thing is, not using judgment words or even adjectives like you are lazy, you are, I really try to speak in very fact-based terms, like things I can observe and hear and see. Another simple tool that I have is one of the other simplest talk shifts is just when you ask questions, starting with the word what or how. So often, if we don't start our questions, because this is one of the simplest ones, you can observe in a meeting, what kind of questions is someone else asking? And when it doesn't start with the word what or how, you'll notice that most of these are solutions or they're closed-ended. Like, have you called the customer? Like, why didn't you do this? In fact, why questions is one of the other things that we generally say, just avoid why questions. You can take a why question and you can convert it to a less aggressive question by saying, I wonder, I wonder what happened here. And so rather than, why did you do that? Or why is the customer upset? Yeah. And so that's one of the other kind of examples of how we can just change and substitute a couple of words out.
I know some people, and I know that like, if my dad were listening to this, he'd be thinking this as well. Does anybody ever say, what the hell is going on with the business? Why are people so soft where they can't handle these types of questions? Because I know that if I was having a conversation with my dad, former USSR, and I said, Dad, you should use words like this because they're less aggressive. His immediate response would be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, if you can't handle me asking, why is somebody upset? I don't know what to tell you. And I'm sure there are a lot of leaders out there, maybe they're old school leaders, who knows, that are probably thinking, why do I need to soften my language to talk to my people? Like, what is happening where we can't have just direct conversations? And, there's all this conversation about things like radical candor and being direct and open and upfront. And then we see this kind of flip side of changing how we think. So I'm curious to hear your perspectives on that. Why this change? And is it just because are we becoming just softer as a society?
So I have a lot of comments about that. So one, this is one of the things that I used to say as a leader as well. I mean, I didn't turn like all like, touchy-feely like overnight, So
Yeah.
it was like a 6 or 7 year journey. So I'm going to answer that in a couple different ways. One, practically speaking, to the leader who says, why do I have to do like, well, do you want to keep your employees? Do you want to have employees that are engaged? So that's why, you don't have to do it out of some kind of altruistic or whatever. The second thing that's I think is embedded there, and admittedly this is something that I found myself saying, is like, why are you so insensitive that I need to kind of like treat you with kid gloves or whatever? And what I would flip around that, and this is something that I've kind of evaluated my own self, is, as we say, why are you so sensitive that I need to kind of, treat you with kid gloves and use all these soft words? And I think that every time a leader says to themselves or someone says, why are you so sensitive? We also need to ask the other question is, why am I so insensitive? Because maybe the problem is not that the other person is sensitive. It's that we're being insensitive. And I would dare to say, as a person who said those words many, many times in my career, that the people who say, why are you so sensitive? The problem is not that the other person is so sensitive. It's that the person who says that is too insensitive.
Interesting.
And so I think the other thing is, we've been talking about millennials and wanting positive feedback. So I think that this trend has been brewing for a long time.
Yeah.
And COVID and the quarantine kind of pushed it over the edge. When I moved to Europe to found, our businesses in France and Germany and the UK and, one of the things that, and anybody who's worked outside of the United States would know this, is they would say, oh, you Americans live to work, but everyone else in the world works to live. Outside of maybe China and Hong Kong and India is maybe a little bit different. But if you go to Australia or UK, there's much more work-life balance. So I believe that we are not in, what I'm seeing for the first time is that work to live mindset is actually seeping pretty seriously into the US. So this is not a great resignation. It's a great renegotiation. Employees are many employees have already renegotiated the fundamental work contract in America. And as leaders, we're just hoping it's going to go back to the old way. But the people who don't adapt, the companies and leaders that don't adapt, are the ones that run the risk of getting into a kind of a death spiral. If you have a team of 10 people and you lose 2 people and everybody's already stressed out as is, then that means the other 8 people are now carrying the workload. But who did you probably lose? You probably lost the 2 best people because they're the ones that can actually go find another job.
Yeah.
So you didn't just lose 20% of your workforce, you probably lost 30 to 40% of the output, if not more, of that team. So if we don't change, what I see, my company, for example, despite my kind of difficult ways, I had a great team of much softer, more compassionate second in command people around me to kind of soften the I was like bubble boy, they would soften my words after I left the room. And but we had like 99.3% level employee engagement. I mean, I asked a CEO of the company who I hired 6 years ago, I said, how are you guys doing with the whole great resignation? He's like, we're doing great because we have a strong culture. We aren't losing people. We're going and picking off the people from the mediocre and bad places to work. So we have this kind of winner takes all situation that the mediocre and low, not so good culture teams and companies are losing at a significantly higher rate, and the companies that are changing the game are winning.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always tell companies is that the great resignation is actually the great opportunity if people are willing to take advantage of that opportunity. And if you do change and create that culture where people want to show up, then you're not going to have those problems. You're going to be taking the people from those companies that are having the problems. So it's interesting.
It's this flight to quality. I mean, I talked to some commercial real estate people, and I'm like, why are these office buildings being built? They're saying it's a flight to quality. Are the best restaurants that everyone loves to go? Are they going out of business? No, they're doing great. Flight to quality. Employees, flight to quality. And companies that aren't changing, and specifically the individual leaders who aren't changing, are the ones you can have a great company with a great company culture, but if you have a leader who doesn't have good, strong emotional bonds with the people, then the company itself is not going to necessarily keep someone there working for a mediocre or bad leader.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the things that we mentioned earlier, the difference between creating a vision that people want to follow versus being a person that people want to follow. What did you learn about how to become that person? And how do you separate that from the vision? Like what makes you a leader who people actually want to follow?
I think it's probably more than anything. Well, it does come down to communication, I believe, it's just how we. A good example is the more autonomy and space for real conversation. I mean, you mentioned candor and candid conversations. The 22 talk shifts are tools to have candid conversations, just in a more compassionate way than an aggressive way. So, I mean, there's no one who reads the book and says, oh, yeah, those are really easy conversations. And they're actually tools for having very difficult conversations. Possibly many readers say, I would never ask that question of my wife or employee because I'm afraid to ask it.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't sound like a touchy-feely kind of tool, but we give tools of how to have these conversations. I say that in the preface to the book, I say that we need to start talking about the words. The words we're saying, the ones we're choosing, the ones we're using, and the ones we're saying, and most importantly, the ones we aren't. Because it's the fear-fueled silence that is actually causing our relationships at work and at home to end in silence. And so I think when you come back to that kind of being a person that someone wants to follow in a corporate setting, I think it's about autonomy and having people feeling that they have a little bit more control over their work. And so a simple example that we talk about in one of the talk shifts is the difference between requests and demands. Now, I'm the boss. Jacob, I need you to get that project done, and it needs to be done by Thursday at 5 p.m. or whatever. Well, that's a demand.
Yeah.
I can say, hey, Jacob, here's this project. When do you think you could have it done by? And you know what? If you say Thursday at 4 p.m., you actually committed to do it 1 hour earlier than I was going to tell you that it needed to be done. And if you say Monday at 5 p.m., I can still come back as the boss and say, Jacob, unfortunately, I do need it by Friday at 5 p.m. But simply changing that 30 seconds of me asking you first, you're going to be more committed to your deadline if you decide. And I can still come back and just say, I need it sooner.
Yeah.
And so it's a subtle change in how and obviously in the book, we go into much more, situations of how to use it and how not to use it. And that, I think, is just a simple difference between aggressive leadership and compassionate leadership that gives people a little bit more control.
Well, let's talk about a couple other of those examples, because you have 22 in the book. I think maybe we've talked about like 3 or 4 of them. Are there a couple other favorites that pop into mind? Maybe we can go another 3 or 4 or so.
Well, the one that is probably most commented on by readers is we call it the scale of 1 to 10.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And so I'm sure many people would not be say on a scale of 1 to 10. So let's talk about communication. And this could be a communication in a work or professional. Like I'm a boss. I say, hey, Jacob, do we have good communication? And is there any other answer than yes for you?
Yeah.
No. So, yeah, we have good communication. Or I could say, Jacob, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong do you think our communication is? Notice that the question is actually a how question, a what or how question. But then what we do is, so now you could say 7 or 8 or 9. The next tool we do is we exaggerate the scale. I say, Jacob, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being we have the best relationship of any coworkers that you have ever heard about, friends, movies you've seen. 1 being ours is the worst, worse than any movie, worse than Office Space, whatever. Where are we on that scale? And now you're like, well, yeah, 7. Well, that's a lot more room for honesty because 7 on that scale is not overly bad, right?
Yeah. No, I like that one a lot. I think that makes a lot of sense because you're right. I mean, the way that we frame questions to either be yes or no really doesn't give that much useful information. But as soon as you throw that scale in there, I think it gives a lot more context.
So interestingly, like one of the things that readers most frequently comment is that that they use this tool with their kids at the dinner table, and they say like, I have totally different conversations with my children now because I say on a scale of 1 to 10, how did your day go? And they're, oh, it was a 7. Well, what's the difference between a 7 and a 9?
Yeah.
And then it creates these much more powerful conversations.
I'm going to try that with my daughter today when we pick her up from school. She's 5 and some change. And we're gonna see how that works out with her.
Well, so this was one of the reasons why we, like my French teacher, when I learned in 2001, I had a funny story where I was basically kicked out of, one of our customers was the Palais de Festival de Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival. And I went down there and I did a 3-day workshop and I thought I did okay. They called our team and said, don't ever send Krister back here ever again. His French is terrible.
Oh my God.
And I had my French teacher and he basically, I told him what I said. And he goes, oh, you said you must do this. You should do this, which by the way is 2 other simple talk shifts is remove the words you need to, you must, or you should from your vocabulary. And you can replace it simply with the word please. You should get that project in on time. You should have gotten it in earlier. Please get the project in early.
Yeah.
And so I asked him when I was learning French and how to use French in a business setting. I said, "How do you learn a new language quickly?" And he said, "Krister, practice it everywhere, at work, at home, on the streets, everywhere." And so when we were formulating these talk shifts, we specifically chose words and language that could equally be used in a professional setting or in a personal setting so that you can basically practice them, the same language stems in all walks of your life.
All right. Well, let's go over maybe one or two more. I really like that one, 1 to 10. Actually, one that popped into my mind, and I can't remember if this was a specific talk shift or if this was a concept that you had in there, but it's something that a lot of therapists always say. Is that when you're talking about a situation that comes up, to always use the words I feel instead of like you did this, right? So instead of saying, I don't like that you're doing this, you say, you know what? When you do this, I feel like, or I feel like when you do this. And it's something that I'm trying to get better at myself because sometimes I'm very quick to like, whether it's my 5-year-old or my wife or maybe friends to say something like, hey, you like point out things that people do instead of pointing out how I feel or how it impacted me, how what somebody did impacted me. And that's something that I'm at least personally trying to work on.
Well, so interestingly, you actually did one of the do not say talk shifts. So
yeah, that's what it was.
So when we use the word feel in English, and I wonder what it is in Russian. It is similar in French and German. If you look up the word to feel in an English thesaurus, you'll see that the word think is a synonym for feel. Well, if you were to look up the word sentir, which is the French word for feel, if you look it up in a French thesaurus, you will not see the word penser, which is the word for to think. So in many other languages, the thought of feeling and thinking is just totally separate words. It's not overloaded like it is in so. And so here's the simple antidote. When you find yourself saying, I feel like, I feel that, you're actually talking about thoughts. And so what happens often is I say, I feel like you did that on purpose, Jacob. Or I feel that, we end up saying you. Yeah. And so I'm actually putting a judgment on you. So the simple
say the emotion.
I think it's the emotion. Yeah. I feel afraid. Yeah. I feel sad. I feel hurt. And then the other thing that happens is that actually I had read all these books on emotional intelligence, and I was using the word I feel, but I was using it in I feel like, I feel that. Yeah. I thought I've read all this emotional intelligence. I'm talking about my feelings all the time. I didn't talk about my feelings ever. Yeah. And so it's much harder as a leader to say, hey, when you turn that project in late, or the quality of that proposal that you gave, that huge deal we were trying to win, I feel afraid. Yeah. I'm afraid if we lose our largest customer, I don't know what that's going to mean for our jobs or our raises or our financial futures. Well, that's not an easy conversation to have. But if we start having that conversation, rather than criticizing someone for doing a bad job, if I say, I'm your boss and I feel afraid, or I am afraid, if saying I feel afraid is too vulnerable or sounds too soft, if I say I am afraid, assuming you like me and you're not enjoying the fact of like watching me be tormented as this afraid person, then you're probably going to be much more interested in helping to resolve and remove that state of fear that your results or your actions have kind of started to create on my side, right?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And that's the big thing that I'm trying to work on, is to say the emotion after I feel, because you're right. And I've done this for many, many years, as I would say, I feel like you, and it's like, wait a minute, you didn't actually explain how you feel. You totally avoided the emotion part there at all. It's very sneaky.
There's one last thing to watch is if the word after I feel ends in ed, I feel judged. Well, this is actually this is like what I call a false feeling in the book. Because if it completes the sentence, you judged me, when I say I feel judged, it's the same thing as saying I feel that you are judging me. It's not a feeling.
Yeah. So you need to make sure
I recommend in the book.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I recommend in the book to just start when you're trying, especially I'm not very in touch with my emotions. I start with just the 5 or 6 core emotions, and it's a multiple choice question. There is none of the above. I feel sad. I feel mad. I feel glad. I feel hurt. I feel ashamed. Embarrassed is another word. And we just pick whichever one, are afraid. And I pick whichever one is closest to what I'm feeling. And then I can say, I feel mad. Well, I'm enraged, or am I anxious? Or you can pick softer variations of the actual feeling, or more, fear can be I'm afraid, I am anxious, or stress is just a form of fear that's maybe a little bit more acceptable to talk about in the corporate environment. But I feel terrified, right? That would be, you would never say that to your boss. So you can but you need to know that you're actually in the fear family.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you don't really know how to get out.
No, I love that. I think that's great advice. And again, it's something that I'm trying to work on, not just personally, but also professionally as well. And I think it's actually it's part of being, I guess, a little bit more vulnerable as a leader, is trying to use those emotions instead of, putting up that stereotypical wall, the office space wall, as I like to call it. We only have a couple minutes left, so maybe we can spend just a minute or two talking about how people can start actually making this shift. So where do you start? Do you have some practical tips? How do you keep people accountable? Like where do you begin with all this?
Well, the simplest is to get the book. The book gives tools also to how to ask others to hold you accountable. All of these issues are kind of addressed. We do actually, once my company was sold this year, I decided that 100% of our profits are actually given to charity. I don't take any compensation from this effort. So we actually are we give the book away just for our, cover our printing and shipping costs. And you can get that at talkshift.com. Of course, if you would prefer to give Jeff Bezos a little bit more of your money, you can pay twice as much and get it on amazon.com. But, and then there are other tools for leaders and, if you want to buy extra copies of the book for your team, it's all, we have discounted pricing to kind of get the word out.
Okay, very cool. So grab the book.
And there's one other thing on that is that we created one of the first ever video books purposely with the intention that a lot of these tools are much more powerful if you actually experience them together with someone. You're not going to pull your team in and necessarily, each of the chapters is about 10 minutes long. So you could actually watch a chapter with a team to get kind of a shared understanding of what it is, like watching a TED Talk if you've ever done that as a team. But it's even more powerful to do with a family, with teenagers, adult, your parents or spouse, to actually just truly get on the same page by watching on television or on the computer the actual tools. And then start having a conversation about, hey, Jacob, this is something that I'd like you to practice a little bit more in our communication, and let the other person help each of us to prioritize which of these 22 tools would be the 1 or 2 or 3 that we could, start with.
No, I like that approach, and it's simple and straightforward. And I guess probably the easiest thing for people to do is just to start, right? I mean, just start making some of these talk shifts. It's not that complicated. Just change the way you talk.
Everybody who's picked up the book has said, literally, if you pick up the book within the first 20 minutes, you'll already have one thing that you could start asking people differently. Like each chapter has say it this way instead of that way. And you can choose which ones are more powerful to you, or more importantly, ask other people around you, which ones do you think would be actually the best for our communication? Or ultimately, I always say if it's too uncomfortable to ask someone about your relationship, just ask about your communication, because the answer is the same.
Ah, I like that.
If you ask your wife, hey, honey, how do you think about our communication on a scale of 1 to 10? If she says 7, her answer to how do you think about our relationship is probably going to be pretty close to 7 as well.
Yeah, no, you're probably right.
We won't let her listen to the episode before you ask, though.
No, I'm absolutely not. Definitely not going to listen to that.
Because then she'll know the secret.
Yeah, I'll do that as a test later. I'll let you know how it goes. Where can people go to learn more about you? You mentioned where people can grab the book. It sounds like it's available anywhere and everywhere. But is there anything else that you want to mention for people to check out?
I do a lot of keynote speaking. You can at Krister.com, Krister with a K. That's my personal website that talks about some of the things I do on the kind of the corporate side. But for the most part, for me, it's much more about the book, and share the book, give it to as many people as possible, because we're really trying to. I really do believe that this book could change the words of the world at some level.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insights and stories. I had a lot of fun talking about some of this stuff. I'm sure, or I hope people who are watching and listening got something out of it and had a little bit of fun too. And thank you again.
Thank you very much, Jacob.
And thanks everyone again for tuning in to my guest. Again, Krister Ungerböck. Make sure to check out his book. It's called 22 Talk Shifts. You can get it wherever books are sold. And I will see all of you next week.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode. Please remember to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred channel is. I cannot express how important those reviews and ratings are to the success of this show, and they keep allowing me to bring back amazing guests. Lastly, don't forget to check out the brand new PDF that I just put out, which looks at the evolution of the employee. In other words, how employees are evolving and changing, and what you as an organization should do to adapt. You'll get a complete breakdown of what that evolution looks like, as well as action items that you can and should be taking. That PDF is available at thefutureemployee.com. And if you want to reach out to me for whatever reason, whether it's inviting me to speak, sponsoring the show, or just giving me some feedback, you can always do so. My email is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Again, that's jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.